Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says his people have the right to protest, but warns violence is unacceptable. Hello, I'm Barbara Serra. This is Al Jazeera Live from London. Also coming up on the program, renewed strikes on parts of Damascus as rebels announce a united front against Assad's government. The UN says security forces have killed 7 protesters in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And from Dubai to Hong Kong, 2018 is welcomed with spectacular firework displays around the world. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has spoken for the first time since widespread protests began in the Islamic Republic. While supporting people's general right to demonstrate, he warned violence would not be tolerated as the public shouldn't, quote, feel concerned about their lives and security. This comes as the government has temporarily blocked social media, including the messaging app Telegram, to stop details being spread about upcoming protests. For 3 days now, there have been rallies across the country against the clerical elite, who they blame for economic hardship and alleged corruption. The government is warning of a crackdown if the protests continue. On Saturday night, 2 people were killed in the city of Durud, although there is confusion over who is responsible for the deaths. Peter Sharp reports.
After 4 days of anti-government demonstrations, it's the president's first public reaction, and he trod carefully. Iranians have the right to protest, but that can't lead to violence, he said.
It should be clear to everyone that we are people of freedom, and according to the Constitution and citizens' rights, people are free to express their criticism and to protest. However, we need to pay attention to the manner of that criticism and protest. It should be in such a way that it will lead to the improvement of the people and the state.
He was also quick to criticize President Trump for his tweets about Iran.
This man who today in America wants to sympathize with our people has forgotten that a few months ago he called the nation of Iran terrorists.
This video of protests posted on social media has been blocked by the Iranian government. The ban follows nationwide demonstrations since Thursday. Government ministers said the video encouraged more people to join the rallies.
We all saw how they misused cyberspace and promoted violence, trained systematic riots, taught weapons and explosives crafting, simulated protesters to fight the police and encouraged the burning of houses and stores. These people are surely not part of our people.
Iran state television has reported that some social media sites and messaging apps have been blocked to maintain what it termed peace. And from the government, warnings that Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps was prepared to deploy what was described as an iron fist if the demonstrations continued. Their commander said the protests have degenerated into people chanting political slogans and burning public property. Protests took place again on Sunday, but the extent of those is still unclear. Video posted from the city of Durud on Saturday night showed demonstrators dragging away one of those injured. State television in Tehran said 2 people were shot dead but denied that police or the army were involved.
During the clash that took 2 lives, no bullets were shot from police and security forces at the people. The gathering was meant to end peacefully, but due to the presence of the agitators, unfortunately, this happened and resulted in the deaths of 2 protesters.
The protests will have rattled the government. They weren't just limited to Tehran, but took place across the country. The only question now is whether they can gather momentum and how long the government is prepared to put up with this challenge to its authority. Peter Sharp, Al Jazeera.
Well, earlier I spoke to Negar Mortazavi, an Iranian-American journalist. She believes that blocking social media could easily backfire on Rouhani.
Some still do have access to Telegram and Instagram and Twitter, and some are saying that either the access has been blocked or the internet is slower. They have to use proxies, which Iranians are very savvy in using and basically bypassing filtering and blockades. But it has made people very angry, even people who have not participated in protests, because internet is an integral part of people's livelihood, especially in larger cities. For example, in Tehran, there's an equivalent app like Uber. There's a ride-sharing app that a lot of young drivers use for their livelihoods, and they're angry. Some of my friends were telling me that their drivers were telling them, why would the internet be cut off, and basically cut us off from our livelihoods who have nothing to do with the protests. And also the protesters, of course, are the ones who are angry at this kind of blockade, which goes back to the 2009 unrest, and is just something that I would say the younger generation didn't expect of this administration to let happen.
Rebel factions in Syria have announced they're forming a united front to stop the Assad government's advance. Opposition fighters are fast losing ground in Syria, and the government bombardment of their strongholds is relentless. At least 4 people are reported to have been killed and dozens more injured in the latest strikes on areas east of the capital, Damascus. Osama bin Javaid reports.
After almost 7 years of war in Syria, a routine sound in a suburb of Damascus. Airstrikes have continued in the rebel-controlled suburb of Ghouta. Close to 400,000 besieged Syrians here have been bombed for years. There's a dash to search for survivors. Debris is carefully removed before movement is spotted under the rubble. Disoriented and scared, children stumble through the mangled metal and wreckage. And kids make up the highest number of the dead and injured in Syria's war. Besides Ghouta, shelling and airstrikes have also continued in the countryside of western Syria. These families have been forced to leave their homes because of the ongoing push by Syrian government forces to regain control of more areas bordering Hama and Idlib provinces.
By God, look at the kids. When the planes hit near the children, my God, how they scream. The biggest push for us was our kids. They don't know anything but the sound of airplanes and shelling, a life of exhaustion and terror.
Rebels are trying to stop the steadily advancing Syrian army. And they're forming a united front called the National Army. It's made up of 37 factions from Aleppo, Daraa, Homs, Ghouta and Hama. But it's not the first time that a similar group has been announced. And questions remain about how scattered militias will be brought under a united chain of command, and how will they be funded.
The government and the National Army put servants and guards for the country and our families on all Syrian land. We call on you to be united and to agree on the national project to support your sons here who have announced an open war on all the enemies.
Calendars show a new year, but the change of dates doesn't mean much for Syrians who've lived through almost 7 years of suffering. Osama bin Javaid, Al Jazeera.
Yasser al-Haji is an advisor to the opposition-led Syrian interim government, which announced a new alliance. He says a stronger alliance could help bring stability to the region sooner.
It will do, I think, good for on both sides. First, there will be a professional army, national army, ranking and officers and trained and everything. The other side, I think that will help achieve more peace, more durable peace, because so far the Russians, they are working on one side, not take into consideration the revolution side. And this is one way to prove that we are there, and they have to also hear our demand to have better Syria, democratic Syria, no dictatorship in Syria. So far, until now, the interim government have no income, but lately we had took control of 3 crossings to Syria, which is one, Bab al-Salama, Jarablus, and Daraya, and that allow us to have income, and we can support this army. So this army came on a real idea, this is going to hold up, and we're going to build it really good because we start to have some income.
The UN says security forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo have killed at least 7 people in protests in Kinshasa. Demonstrators are demanding that President Joseph Kabila step down and hold new elections. They're angry at his refusal to leave when his term ended a year ago. He then promised elections by the end of this year. They've now been delayed until next December.
Our soldiers, our policemen are coming and shooting on people. It is unbelievable. We have come here in order to pray for our nation. We are free as a Congolese people to pray for our nation. Is that a sin for us?
Starting Monday, January 1st, 2018, Mr. Kabila cannot be recognized as the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Yes. We are telling everybody all over the world, this guy has to go. This guy doesn't like Congo. This guy has nothing to do with Congo, and his time is up.
Israel's governing party has approved a draft resolution urging its leaders to formally annex parts of the occupied West Bank, a move likely to further anger Palestinians. Mohammed Jamjoom has more now from West Jerusalem.
Now that the Likud Central Committee has voted in favor of imposing Israeli sovereignty over illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank, the question is, what comes next? Many members of the Likud Central Committee in the run-up to this vote had thought that this was a binding resolution. They had said so, which in effect would mean that it would compel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the rest of the Likud party to try to take this to the Knesset to try to get it passed into law. We've spoken to many analysts, though, however, who say that this, in fact, is not a binding resolution and that there is no way that such an inflammatory resolution would actually get to the Knesset in its current form. We've also spoken to Arab members of parliament, and they've said that if this resolution were to go to the Knesset in its current form, that would really signal an end to the peace process, that it would really mean that there was no more attempt to try to find a two-state solution to the crisis here. Now, what is important also is what exactly is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu going to do next? Is he going to endorse this? What is he going to say? Many more questions at this hour than answers, but a lot of other analysts that we've spoken with throughout the day in the run-up to the vote have said that they really believe that this is more of a cynical political calculus, a way for the Likud Central Committee to really rally the faithful, especially at a time when just weeks ago U.S. President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Whatever does happen next, though, this is a tense time, and this vote may add another element of uncertainty at a time when there is already so much uncertainty.
Still to come here on Al Jazeera. They've survived for centuries in one of the world's harshest environments, but the future is uncertain for these North African nomads. Plus,
Mariana Sanchez in Honduras, where tons of rubbish, mainly from Guatemala, are not only causing a direct impact in the ecosystem, but tensions between both countries.
And now a reminder of the top stories on Al Jazeera. Iran's president says his people have the right to protest, but warns that violence is unacceptable. The government has temporarily blocked social media apps after 3 days of rallies across Iran. Rebel factions in Syria have announced they're forming a united front called the National Army to stop the Assad government's advance. And the UN says security forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo have killed at least 7 people at protests in Kinshasa. 17 people have been killed in an attack at a funeral in the eastern Afghan city of Jalalabad. It happened as people gathered for the funeral of a former district governor. Now, no group has yet said it was responsible for the attack. Earlier this week, ISIL said it was behind the killing of at least 41 people at a Shia cultural center in Kabul. Gunmen have stormed an army training camp in Indian-administered Kashmir, killing at least 4 soldiers. A military spokesman says the armed men threw grenades and fired automatic rifles at the camp in Pulwama district. Victoria Gatenby reports.
A wreath-laying ceremony for soldiers killed during a rebel siege at an army training camp in Indian-administered Kashmir.
The attack took place and we were all full alert, and it was because of our alertness that we were able to confine them to a particular building. The operation started and the evacuation was done, and we have already killed 2 terrorists.
Earlier on Sunday, soldiers tried to flush out the rebels. Extra police were sent to seal off the camp while the siege unfolded. The sound of grenades and automatic gunfire an indication that the rebels had no intention of surrendering. Rebels stormed the camp on Saturday night. The local police chief says he was already aware an attack was imminent.
I think last 2-3 days the input was coming and they were trying. They probably did not get the right place and time earlier. So it is, they struck last night.
These villagers who live near the camp shout pro-rebel slogans. For decades, Indian-administered Kashmir has been at the centre of a Muslim separatist movement against Hindu-dominated Indian rule. Separatist groups are fighting for the Indian-administered portion of Kashmir to either become independent or merge with Pakistan. The killing of a prominent rebel commander last year provoked widespread protests, and there's no sign the latest siege will do anything to ease the tension. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
At least 36 people have been killed in a bus crash in Kenya. The vehicle collided with a truck near the town of Nakuru, about 150 kilometers north of Nairobi. Local officials say the bus's brakes may have failed. More than 100 people have died on the same stretch of road just this month. For decades, the nomadic Tuareg people of Niger have fought for greater political and economic inclusion. A peace deal signed 10 years ago was meant to overturn years of marginalization and neglect. But after years of drought and conflict, a lack of education is now a major obstacle to building a new life. Mohamed Val reports.
It's a harsh winter in northern Niger. And for many Tuareg here, the sting of cold weather is compounded by poverty. After years of drought and war in the region, these former masters of the Sahara have been reduced to a state of limbo. Midway between their previous life as livestock herders and the total destitution many suffer now.
Our country has turned into a barren desert. Our livestock can no longer survive without plants and grass. In addition, we cannot live in or work in towns.
Abdurrahman used to live as a nomad, roaming with his livestock in search of pasture and water. Now he lives in a makeshift shelter, as miserable as the most basic refugee camp. There's no running water here, no medical center, no schools, no steady supply of food and other necessities.
I used to own large herds of livestock. All my cattle died and I was forced to move to town. Since I came, I do not know what to do. I have no profession. My children are without work too. We are living on donations and aid from agencies.
Our biggest mistake is that we did not go to school. We now found that we cannot work or find a job without education. We are harmed by illiteracy more than the drought. Our life is meaningless now.
Other Tuareg who settled here years ago still live in humble mud homes in villages that lack the most basic amenities. Frustrated with the government and dejected by poverty, some have formed associations to mobilize everyone to work. They've planted vegetable gardens and trees around the village, expecting relief agencies or the government to provide support. But the barren soil and severe climate render their efforts almost useless. The Tuareg of Niger have long ended their rebellion against the central government, but the peace that ensued hasn't brought them prosperity. Mohamed Val, Al Jazeera.
Tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating in Togo, demanding an end to the 15-year rule of President Faure Gnassingbé. It's the latest in a string of protests organized by opposition groups in the West African nation that have been taking place since August. Protesters want new rules limiting presidents to 2 terms in office. Gnassingbé and his father before him have ruled Togo since 1967. 12 people have been killed in a plane crash in Costa Rica. The small aircraft came down in Guanacaste province, about 200 kilometers northwest of the capital, San Jose. The government says 10 of those killed were foreigners. Conservationists in Honduras are warning of an environmental disaster as walls of rubbish wash up on its beaches. Much of it has floated along the Caribbean coast from neighboring Guatemala. And as Mariana Sanchez reports, biologists say the level of contamination is unprecedented.
A sea of rubbish as far as the eye can see. It's a wall 7 meters deep and several kilometers long, moving slowly along the Caribbean coast of Honduras. Video posted in the internet by a photographer raised the alarm. Marine biologist Gustavo Cabrera says the tide of trash is killing nearly everything in its path.
Es un ecocidio.
This is an ecocide caused by garbage carried by the Motagua River in Guatemala. There are 96 municipalities, especially 13, that don't have trash dumps, and a tributary river from the capital contributes to all this garbage.
Cabrera says the rubbish mountain is blocking sunlight from the sea and affecting fishing grounds, coral reefs and mangroves. Much of the garbage ends up here on Omoa Beach. Hospital and agro-industrial residues are putting the lives of Hondurans in danger. Government leaders in Honduras blame neighboring Guatemala for the disaster. The Guatemalan government says both countries share the responsibility for cleaning up the mess.
Guatemala has promised to send the army to clean up the mess, but the rubbish piling up on the beaches is already having an impact on communities along the shore.
Madeline Rivera says fishermen like him are unable to catch clean, healthy fish.
Look at my little boat. I can't go far out in the sea to fish. The trash is too close.
Roger Santos says the restaurant hotel he manages has fewer and fewer guests because of the filth.
We have less and less guests because people want to see clean beaches and we are losing money. Also because we're spending a lot to clean up every day.
The hotel boss says the shore is a magnet for the trash. Marine biologists say much of it is plastic, which can take more than 200 years to disintegrate. And much of it is liquid and invisible, with experts unable to say how much damage is being done. Mariana Sanchez, Al Jazeera, Omoa, Honduras.
Tight security measures are in place around Times Square for New York's annual New Year's Eve celebrations. Up to 2 million people are expected to watch the famous ball drop at midnight. Kristen Salumi has been finding out what the police are doing to keep people safe.
It's called the Crossroads of the World, attracting visitors from near and far to ring in the new year. But this year more than ever, Times Square is in the crosshairs. The New York Police Department has seen an increase in ISIL-inspired attacks, 3 in the last 16 months. 8 people have been killed, most of them tourists.
He was petrified about me coming to Times Square on New Year's Eve because of the risk.
You know, I see all of the policemen around and the cameras. It seems like they keep you pretty safe, but I'd rather not be around.
I think we're ready.
John Miller, the department's Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism, says ISIL is more focused on attacks in the West as it loses ground in places like Iraq and Syria.
The shift has been towards marketing the propaganda to the masses on the idea that some tiny, tiny, infinitesimal percentage of them may act. So it may go out to millions or hundreds of thousands of people, but if 5 of them do something, if 3 of them succeed, or 1 of them, it's a great impact. What the terrorist groups have focused on is low tech, low cost, but high impact.
NYPD patrol officers and special ops teams are the first line of defense. This year, more will be stationed on roofs and in hotels, and nearby parking garages will be closed. Police will also be using more dogs trained to sniff out someone carrying explosives in the crowd.
This is actually where the ball is going to drop. He's got the,
Behind the scenes at the NYPD's Joint Operations Center, they will also be watching the crowds for suspicious behavior. How many cameras do you have access to in this room?
Several thousand. We can't really go into specifics.
Not just in Times Square, but all around the city. And officers have new guidelines on how to handle a would-be suicide bomber. Come December 31st, this room will be filled with more than 100 people from state, local, and federal agencies, not just law enforcement, but also sanitation workers and utility companies, anyone the police might need to contact for a quick emergency response.
It's a moment of great pride for New York City.
City officials insist Times Square will be safe.
Terrorists regard New York as the exact kind of place they want to disrupt, and New Yorkers respond consistently with strength and resiliency.
And plenty of tourists are willing to take the risk.
I feel like they're doing everything that they can, so I feel like we should have nothing to worry about.
No, I try not to think about it. Life's too short.
With so much security, cold weather may keep more people away from this holiday tradition than fear. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
Well, people have been celebrating the arrival of 2018 with parties across the world. Catherine Stansel takes a look at some of the most spectacular fireworks displays so far.
3, 2, 1.
One of the first places on the planet to welcome the new year, New Zealand, followed by Australia and a spectacular fireworks display over Sydney Harbour Bridge. The rainbow colours celebrating the legalization of gay marriage in the country. Next, Japan, where revelers in Tokyo gathered to release hundreds of white helium balloons, each one containing a wish or a prayer for the new year. In South Korea, people filled the streets near Seoul's City Hall to celebrate 2018. And half an hour later, neighbouring North Korea, which has inflamed the international community with a number of missile tests this year, had its own fireworks display. And Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong was a blaze of lights when the clock struck midnight. Dubai, which normally hosts one of the largest fireworks displays in the world, opted for an elaborate light and laser show instead. But amid the joyful celebrations, a serious but hopeful message of peace and unity delivered by the United Nations.
I'm issuing an alert, a red alert for our world. Conflicts have deepened and new dangers have emerged. Global anxieties about nuclear weapons are the highest since the Cold War, and climate change is moving faster than we are. Inequalities are growing, and we see horrific violations of human rights. I urge leaders everywhere to make this New Year's resolution. Narrow the gaps, bridge the divides, rebuild trust by bringing people together around common goals. Unity is the path.
It's an ambitious request, but if there's one thing the new year always brings, it's the hope for something better. Catherine Stansel, Al Jazeera.
You can find much more on our website, aljazeera.com.